All right, Luke, so today we're going through some Rickroll wisdom in an effort to find out which one or which few of his one-liners are actionable. Because, of course, Rick is kind of the patron saint of natural resource investing quotes. So much so that someone made a meme, actually, and I know Luke prefers making lists over laughing, so this one's really for me and the viewers, but Rob PJS on Twitter, who's apparently from New Brunswick, he made this Rickroll bingo card meme, which I thought was great, and I didn't even know they do humor in that part of Canada, or Canada as a whole, but this was really great. But we're kind of taking it a bit more seriously here, and talking about one of the very best, though maybe less popular, Rickroll quotes, which reads, quote, "When I was a young man with a lot of time left on Earth, ironically, I was very impatient. But now, as I age and have less time on Earth, I've developed much more patience," unquote. So what's this all about, Luke? Just Rick being Rick, or is there a real lesson in here?
If you make a transcript of his interviews, almost every sentence has a lot of wisdom in it, and you could talk about every quote for probably an hour. So we have enough content for the next couple of months or years if you use all his quotes. But it's really true. You can think about these things, and you can see that he has experienced a lot of, different type of companies, different involvements as investor or as an underwriter. But he has experienced a lot, and I guess I still feel a level of impatience myself, and I do this for 15 years, and I can imagine that very slowly over time that you get more patient. It's also a market where you always get a new opportunity every day. There's something on offer, a new news release that somehow sparks interest on Twitter, and you read it and you think, oh, maybe I should buy this as well, and then the next day there's something else again. So you constantly get that temptation to buy stuff because there's a new person getting invested, or there's a new discovery, or there's a new something that is special. And one thing we discussed a couple of times is being concentrated and owning just a couple of stocks. Well, you cannot really do that if you jump onto every excitement. And the other thing is indeed having patience. Even though if you can really find good stocks, sometimes it still takes 6 months, 12 months, 24 months before it really develops, or longer. And in an interview yesterday, and in other interviews as well, Rick Rule talked about this and suggested that you need patience to make winners. And really, if you want to make 5 or 10 baggers, almost never do they occur just in a week or 2 weeks, or you have to be very lucky with your entry. So I think it's a topic that you can talk about for a very long time. And think about, like, what is my way of investing, and that's why I took this quote and a couple of other quotes that I sent you as an example, and to look at a couple of companies, like, how do we deal with this? Because I struggle with it myself. I see opportunities almost every week, which is dangerous, and you don't want to keep moving moving your money from one stock to the other stock, because the one takes too long for you to wait, and then the other thing comes up, and you sell stuff to buy the other one again. Even if you have money in your account all the time, at some point there's no money anymore if you keep deploying it at opportunities. So I thought about this quote for a bit, and felt like this is a nice topic to start with today.
This all sounds wonderful, and it's good mental stimulation for smooth brains like mine. But how do I do it in reality? And more specifically, how do I know I should be patient versus cutting my losses and kind of redeploying the capital elsewhere in some of these opportunities that you're seeing there?
I think it's almost like a mindset and a decision that you have to make for yourself. This week was a week. I mean, it was actually a little bit applied to my week this week. I saw a number of opportunities, but I didn't want to really commit more money to the sector. So I was thinking, shall I sell something to buy this opportunity, or shall I not do it? I own a couple of things where I'm personally not expecting anything in the next couple of weeks or months, but I am fairly convinced, well, as far as you can be convinced in junior mining stocks, that these things are going to do well for me. But the timeline is very uncertain. I think these things that I have in mind will happen, if I have a number of stocks in mind, in the next 6 to 12 months. And it could, if it takes 6 to 12 months, that money could be dead money for 6 to 12 months, while the other opportunity I saw this week may be an immediate type thing. But selling my position right now to move it into the other one, it could very well happen that long-term stock suddenly starts moving against my expectation, and the one that I'm putting my money into doesn't do anything or really goes down. So I forgot your question. I'm probably just continuing my own story.
I was just thinking about how you do it in reality, because in my experience so far, patience has just really been a polite way of saying bag holding, and I never intended to become a community member. I tended to make money, right? So it's interesting to think about a real strategy here. And how do you really deal with patience in real life? How do you know you should be patient instead of cutting your losses?
The difference I have with Rick Rule, for example, I think if I listen to him, well, there's many differences, but he also has a lot of patience, he says. And what he often does is he's buying something where there's an unanswered question. I think he's then referring to exploration, not necessarily to his Franco-Nevada investment, perhaps. Uh, and that, for example, a company that has a target delineated over a number of years, and now thinks we should test this target, and we need 5 to 10 holes to really have a good answer whether or not this could be something. And in his mind, those 5 or 10 drill holes will answer that question, perhaps. And then if they say no, those drill holes, those results, then he's out. And he said yesterday in an interview that it doesn't matter if it goes down 30%, 50%, or 70%, he's going to sell because the answer is no. That speaks a little bit against his other philosophy of owning a company for the long run and really having patience. And then he's often referring to people like the Lundins and Quatermain and Ross Beatty. So perhaps he would give them more time, and he wouldn't just invest for 5 drill holes. I almost never buy a stock for the next drill program and wait for that result, and then based on the result sell, because in 90% of the cases you will not succeed, or maybe 95%, unless it's a prospect generator where you have those results on a regular basis and a no answer is not killing the story. But when a no answer is killing the story, even though I think Rick Rule's idea is you can have 8 failures, but the 2 that really succeed make it all worth it. But if you don't have those 2, then I want to say something with an F. And I prefer to own something where I am fairly certain that I'm gonna make that double or triple in the run up towards the results, and then sell out at least half of it. And that's something that Rick Rule also mentioned. If the thing is going up for no reason yet, he would sell half. But in my opinion, it's better to just know where the market is going to go to and anticipate sort of the excitement, and then stick around partly for the drill holes if you want to. So for me, it's part of the strategy to find things where I think the excitement will be around that drill play, and Rick Rule would go into a drill play and typically just wait for the results unless the stock really goes up too much, and which in his mind would not represent anything of value but just speculation of a good result. So I hope that I answered part of the question here. So that's a drill play versus a longer term position for him, I guess, and the way I look at these things.
You made a good point that maybe some operators deserve more patience than others, and that reminds me of the other quote that you have on here, which is lengthy, and again, not the most famous one, but I do like it, and it reads, quote, "When I look at the people who have truly succeeded, company builders like Adolf Lundin, Bob Quatermain, or Ross Beatty, the ones that you mentioned, or investors like Seymour Schulich, Ned Goodman, Eric Sprott, or Frank Justra, the common theme is that they build for the very long term," unquote. So again, easier said than done though when you use hindsight on people who've done it before. But what about the first timers early on? What separates a true company builder from, a promotional CEO who maybe raises money but never really delivers on results before they have any track record to speak of?
Yeah, you probably need a bit of luck too, and skills, of course. But if you have all the capabilities that Ross Beatty has, but you never had a success, you are just as smart or smarter, and you have, in many respects, if you could completely be the duplicate, but the younger version. But you don't get that, for some reason, you don't get that success moment in your life. People may not stick around. So I think because Ross Beatty had a number of successful adventures, or maybe he did have a couple of connections that wanted to support him and led to a success. Of course, then because you did have success, these people follow you, and your status becomes bigger and bigger. And Rick Rule described it as, if Ross Beatty calls with an opportunity, he will always listen and consider to invest. If somebody else calls, he may listen and consider to invest. And Ross Beatty attracts the right geologists because they want to work for him. He attracts the right prospectors with a new project because they know the project will go somewhere if they give it to, if they sell it to him. So of course, at some point, things start to work for you. And the people we always talk about have a very long track record. I mean, the Lundins have been around for decades. Pierre Lassonde as well, Eric Sprott as well, Justra as well. And it's interesting that all the names that if you ask people to mention 5 or 10 names, I think all of them mention people with the age above 60. And in the case of the Lundins, of course, the guys are younger, but their father and grandfathers have done amazing things in their lives. So to find a really young person, I cannot think of one name that has the same sort of the people in a broad sense in this market have the same level of trust in as the typical names: Lundins, Lassonde, Sprott, and the 7 other ones that we could name right now. So I think it's difficult. You need a couple of wins. A person like Chris Taylor, who did it with Great Bear, will attract money again. And if he can deliver another success, of course, then his credibility becomes bigger as well. And for him, of course, it would be less risky if he now would acquire a development project, because if he's going to bet on another discovery, even the smart Chris Taylor has a big risk of not making that discovery, while buying a more advanced project and making it work is probably more depending on your network and your raising of capital, him being able to raise capital rather than having a bit of luck with the rocks. So I think if I don't think I have to give him advice, but I think the safer way for him would be to take a more advanced project that with money and with work can be advanced, rather than a drill play.
I think I have a title for this video: Dutch Man Gives Advice to Billionaires.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of hilarious.
I think there's a lot in here in what you're saying, and specifically in the stuff that you've sent me. One thing that I really like is when Rick talks about the point of no concern. That's kind of I don't know if I could call it a strategy or what I call it, but I mean, the first thing you hear when you read this, the point of no concern, many speculators buy more of a stock that doubles from $1 to $2, even without tangible new information. For me, that stock has become precisely half as attractive. How are those two things connected? Because again, the point of no concern sounds beautiful. That's what I want to have all the time.
Right. Of course, a quote like this, I mean, when you have somebody like Rick Rule, who is amazing at interviews, at speeches, everything almost looks like perfect, and it makes you think that he will always act in a perfect way and he will never make a mistake. I mean, it's a bit of a weird quote, because I wouldn't buy a company with a 10 drill hole program where the program needs to hit for you to stay, and if your expectation is to start buying at $1, thinking it could rise to $2 or $2.50, I wouldn't take the risk of of this big risk of this one drill program, yes or no answer, to get a double or almost a triple with a $2.50. And of course, maybe those numbers are a little bit of an example and not completely his mindset, but the Dutch guy also gives some advice to Rick Rule again that that's not a very smart strategy. No, I think he's right in. I think if you invest really in the drill program, and that's the program that gives you that yes or no answer, the yes answer needs to give you at least a 5 to 10 bagger potential. Otherwise, it is almost crazy to invest in such a program, or it needs to be. I've heard Rick Rule say in 2004, 2003 about Francisco Gold, that was they have done so much work that company didn't. Normally, they would always joint venture it to another company, but they had so much conviction that 2 or 3 drill holes could never really fail. I mean, that would be money well spent, even if they wouldn't hit. But giving it away at that stage would be stupid. And in that case, I can imagine spend your money, drill those couple of holes, and let it confirm your thesis. But in most cases, there's such a high level of uncertainty in a company that it's, in my mind, every drill program is designed to fail, is sort of, in my mind, is going to fail, and I act like it. And I do own stocks through drill programs. If the land package is big, or there's several projects, and you're not just depending on that drill program. And we recently talked to Azimuth. I'm a shareholder there. They have 4 or 5 or 6 projects that, in my mind, could represent the complete market cap right now. In the case of Sunpeak, which is a big investment for me, or speculation, they have such a big land package with so many targets that if they miss 1 or 2 holes, I don't really, well, of course I care about it, but of course I prefer them to hit on the first hole, but that's not realistic in most cases. And I can live with them drilling another year or 2 years before they can potentially make a discovery. So if it's really that 10-hole drill program that needs to answer that question for him, and you're expecting the stock to go from $1 to $3, in the yes answer case, that would not be enough for me. I think with my investment size, and that's not Rick Rule's investment size, but with my investment size, I could find a lower risk 3-bagger. But if you're investing $500,000 to $5 million, of course you need to get some. You cannot play a micro cap that re-rates from 5 cents to 15 cents. That's impossible. So he has a more difficult way to triple his money than I can triple my money, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know your investment size is that much bigger than Rick Rule's, but now I know. Maybe I should treat you differently from now on. You do have a couple of these examples though, and all the charts that you've sent me, they are all kind of different. Some of them go from upper left to lower right. Some of them go from lower left to upper right. Some of them are just weird. What's going on? What do you want to talk about with these charts?
Well, a couple of examples of what I just explained, like, and again, I'm not trying to bash companies, but I think it's just realistic to look at a couple of things that failed, at least so far. Sendero Resources was a pretty exciting drill play, and I was listening to them early this year. Stock was trading at 40 cents, which is now $4 after the rollback. The initial drill holes disappointed, and the stock went from 40 cents, now $4 with the rollback included, to 4 cents, which is now 40 cents. So it went 90% down, maybe even more. We don't have to go into the details of Sendero necessarily, but apparently that drill hole killed the complete story, and they have to completely start over again with a rollback and a 90 or 95% loss on the investment if you bought at that promotional level. Copper Nico is not like that so far, but that I talked to them in September. Pretty exciting story, to be honest. I was quite impressed with what they were trying to do, but also realizing this is a bit of a promotional company. Ivan is a good promoter. He probably has a lot of people watching this company. So if they are not gonna hit in the first program, it could fail. So I didn't buy it for that reason. And the first drill hole is disappointing, and the stock went from 50 cents, 48 cents more or less, to right now 30 cents, which is still okay. I mean, if they would deliver the next hole, it could completely, come back again. But that one so far failed, and you can see that you can also lose almost 50% on just one failed drill hole. And the last one, and then I will give the mic back to you. But Cascadia Minerals, we talked to Michael Gentili earlier this year. He invested, stock spiked from 20 cents to 45 cents. It traded there for a little while, and the first drill holes came out, and the stock went back to 10 cents right now. So divided by 5. So I just want to say that buying these drill plays is extremely risky, but especially if the market realizes everything is depending on that one amazing target that everybody's buying the stock for. And if that one drill hole comes back and it's not amazing, you're back at zero, or close to zero, and you have to finance at that level. And I think if I plan to keep my position through a drill program, like I do with Azimuth or with Sunpeak and a couple of other companies, I only do it if I think, and I think the market understands that that company is not depending on that next drill hole. Otherwise, it's too risky for me, and I will wait the drill hole. And if it then confirms the thesis, I'm okay paying the higher price. And the higher price is the next image I took with me, the one that you just mentioned.
Those are the ones that didn't work out that you've brought with you, and I'm now going through them here, looking at them. You have Hercules metals. Used to be Hercules silver. They didn't even want to go for, well, I suppose they wanted to, but they were going for silver. They found copper, deep buried porphyry. A lot of these other charts that you've brought with you, or you brought me, are similar, but just kind of at different points. So if you look at the Hercules chart, what's interesting about it is that if you then go to the Snowline chart, Snowline had a comparable moment right above the 2024 number where the chart looked the same and then it continued in one way. And then other companies have had comparable charts too, where it kind of, the excitement dies off, but then it comes back. So what is the difference between these two types of charts, where one of it, the excitement never comes back, and some of those, like Reunion, like NGEX, like Snowline, they've managed to bring back the excitement?
I think even the companies that are sort of, let's just say, amazing, Reunion, NGX, Philo, where everybody agrees, Great Bear, it was an amazing story from begin to end. Those companies also have pullbacks from 50 cents to 25 cents in Reunion's case, or Great Bear, I think, went back from $8 or $9 to $5, I guess. You cannot avoid those type of swings, which is still 30%. But those companies at some point, like Reunion, if you get to a 200 or 300 million market cap and you finance and you have a bit of time to drill more holes and test your thesis, you're not completely dead. If you're drilling a target that is just a target at that point, and it all depends on the hole confirming, is it something or is it nothing? Even if that drill hole is not killing the story, the market will consider it to kill the story in a lot of cases. And in the Reunion case, the moment you start drilling 100-meter plus holes of consistent mineralization close enough to surface to make it work potentially, then one hole a little bit further away not hitting is not a big problem, or some weaker markets in between is not a big problem. And that's why I think at some point, I think Reunion, I realized I was told at 8 or 9 cents or 10 cents, I think, that this was a big opportunity, and I saw a lot of concerns, so I didn't buy it. And I think only around 25, 27 cents is when I thought, okay, this is probably really one of the better discoveries right now. And I didn't buy it, but I probably at that point could have bought it. But it's psychological in a way that, hey, I heard about the story at 8 or 9 or 10 cents. Now it's 27. Do I still want to buy it? And I think if you can step away from those psychological concerns, like, oh, I've seen it before and earlier, and maybe I should have bought it, and now it feels late. I think in Reunion's case, I realized it was still an opportunity, but I couldn't really buy it. And in NGX case, I bought it. I did buy it, but it did already have a bit of a spike, which could have been a leak, but also had a strong period ahead of those holes in 2003. But I could still buy it at $4, and right now it's $11 or something. So I think the moment the company starts confirming that they have something that's real and big, and the market recognize it, like Snowline, there is a point in time, I think, that everybody knows that this is not going to completely fail anymore because of geology. It's just a question, how big is it gonna be? And with Snowline right now, even at this market cap, people think it's cheap. For me, it's a bit difficult to know, is this going to be worth 1.5 billion or 2.5 billion? Since I find I don't really have an edge in making the judgments versus other analysts, I'm not going to make the judgment, and I'm not going to buy it. But there may even be a lot of upside here in Snowline even. So I think as an investor, like Q2 Metals, for example, they are showing that they have a big lithium deposit. Even though I have some concerns about the warrants and the shares, that looks like a really big discovery that could continue to give, but also came back from $1.40 to $1 in my mind because of the topic we recently discussed, the shares, the warrants, and the supply of paper that's overwhelming the market right now.
Yep. There are other ways, though, to participate in these discoveries without maybe taking on that much of the risk, and that's potentially also one of the other slides that you wanted to talk about. But Origin Royalties has performed incredibly well. It's a royalties company. A lot of the excitement, though, comes from one discovery. So that's one good example that you've brought with you. I guess there are more, but what do you want to talk about here?
Well, this one is probably the biggest gold discovery. Well, Snowline is a very big discovery, but this one is probably even bigger. In Nevada, made by Anglo Gold. They optioned the property, I think, in 2008, but with Renaissance, the previous name of Origin, they already optioned it in 2014 or 15, and maybe in hindsight they could have done things in a better way. But of course, hindsight is always very easy. But this royalty is now worth so much. The stock went from 50, well, actually 30 cents to $1.60. Right now, it came back a little bit. And if you look at this table that I brought with me, that you can see that in 2021, 2022, I think that was about the time when people started to recognize this is a really big discovery. And I looked at the number of news releases that mentioned Anglo Gold and Silicon, just to get an understanding, like how easy was it to spot this one. In 2023, there were so many news releases. Every week, somebody mentioned this company in a news release, so that it's obvious that the market started understanding this is big, because other companies started mentioning this discovery too. And even if you bought it in mid 2023, when everybody was already writing news releases about this discovery, you could buy the stock at 50 cents and make it three-bagger within a year. And I think there's more upside left if you own a piece of or royalty of the best gold discovery in maybe 10 or 20 years, which of course we often say that, but there's only 10 companies that you can qualify as the best discovery, and this one belongs to it. Then those assets are worth a lot and are true company makers. So I think it's, if you bet on the right people, that's one thing. But betting on a discovery, I think, is safer and easier after the fact. The more difficult thing is psychologically, can you accept not buying close to the low, but at a much higher price, but with higher certainty that it's real and big and it's going to work.
That is currently my biggest challenge. I think our friend Tom Woolridge is good at this, where he can recognize a good discovery early on after it's been made. He doesn't mind paying a 20, 30, 40% premium, and that's something he always tells me. With me, though, it's kind of, I struggle with that exact thing. I'm like, oh, I was looking at this thing when it was 5 cents. It's 10 cents now, so it's doubled. But it's one of the best discoveries, and it's going to $1.60. You can still make a whole lot of money on it. But it's there's something wrong with there's a lot wrong with my brain. But there's something wrong with my brain in that regard that kind of stops me from doing that. So that's hard. I don't know if Rick has any wisdom for that. That could be good.
Well, I'm sure he has wisdom for it, but in my case so far, it never completely. I mean, it's still there. The concern of, and if you follow this market very closely, you can always argue to yourself, I've seen this stock at 5 cents and now it's 15 or 20 or 30 cents. Because if you follow everything, you see these stocks trade at those levels because you look at these things. And maybe an idea came into your mind at some point, oh, maybe this is interesting. If you didn't buy it and then a year later they make a big discovery, it is not completely fair to say, I saw this one and I noticed it. I mean, you were not convinced enough to buy it, so you just looked at it at that price and you didn't really buy it, which still makes it difficult to buy it then if it's already a 5 or 10 bagger. But sometimes I have a couple of experiences where I was willing to pay the double or the triple in price and still made very good returns. And sometimes I try to convince myself with, okay, but my certainty here is also quite high. Let's also buy more than I would have bought a year ago. So if a year ago I was willing to put in, let's just say $10,000, right now I'm willing to put in $30,000 and try to make a return from there. So maybe you can, if you can financially, also invest more at that 3-bagger price if you really still think there's a 3-bagger left. And it's probably easier to recognize NGX in April 2023 than before that. So NGX, I think, is a good example, which of a fairly safe, and that's always a tricky thing to say, speculation in this business, because the discovery was made and is backed by the Lundins. And I think a couple of other examples in this list, like Montage, which is not a discovery. are a little bit like that. When somebody like that steps in and says in the press release, we are going to make this work, then the conviction is higher than when the average 37-year-old says something like that on a podcast.
Well, and I wonder, anyways, I was going to make a joke, but it's not going to come out the way I hoped it, so I better keep it for myself. I'll tell you after the recording. I wonder, though, what is the, maybe that's something we should do as well. I know you're going to enjoy making a list about this, but what if, what is better, and how often do those discoveries actually work? Like, we know that, what do they say, like 1 in 1,000 geophysical anomalies become a mine, but how many of those companies that have a discovery hole, how many of them succeed to make it into an actually decent discovery that you can make money on? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I've never really worked it out in a list. Well, I've made lists about this as well, but I think to make a proper list, you also need to statistically do it well and think about the bias that you may have. Because I would first start looking at the companies I know made it, and then probably the percentage is very high. But I think the easiest one to spot are the longer intercepts, like Lavras Gold last year, when you suddenly out of the blue intercept 200 meters or 300 meters of grade, 1 gram, 2 grams. Those things do not typically just happen and then you drill somewhere else and find nothing. In the case of Ramp, which we discussed earlier this year, it's a bit more tricky because it's only a couple of meters, but amazing grade. If they can continue to hit that grade over 7 meters in step outs, then it could still be a very big high grade discovery that could go 10-20x, but the likelihood of hitting it is lower in my simple mind than a Rupert Resources who drills 200 meters of 2 grams in a discovery hole. It's less likely to be just a lucky strike and nothing else will happen ever. Of course, even safer if you see a second hole confirming that 200 meter intercept 50 or 100 meters away. At that point, I would feel comfortable in most cases to buy it in a big way, and perhaps so big that I sell a bit before the next drill release, so that you play the hype a little bit, sell a little bit, so that you have a bit of money in the account and a bit of a profit. So if the thing goes wrong, that you could still get out at a break-even point or something. And of course, it's easier for everyone to spot these big interval ones. Even a non-geologist like me would recognize something like it. It just doesn't happen very often. So be ready for the next one.
I know you have to run now. You actually had to run a couple of minutes ago. So what are we doing? Cutting in here? Anything else to add this week?
I think, like we said last week, we still need to analyze one or more stories like this. And I think we mentioned founders last week, where we're gonna reverse engineer a discovery like it. Like, how easy would it have been to discover, to recognize it, and at what point was the best point to buy it? How did they make it a success? Because this is a topic that I like personally a lot, because I really try to make money investing in the market, not necessarily getting options for free or a salary. And I guess a lot of people listen to this also just investing with their own money, trying to make a good return and not a double, because that's why you're not in this business. You're here to really try to get a 5 or 10 bagger, and of course that's difficult to do. And let's just analyze one next week and see if there were points in the founder story where you could have bought this with reasonable risk. Mentioning that high, of course, looking back is always easier than being in the moment, but still interesting to do that exercise together with a geologist.
All right, moving on, I'm going to BC again and talking to Kingfisher Metals again, whom we've covered in depth and at length before. There's actually a playlist on the YouTube channel that contains all the previous interviews I've done with Dustin. Some of them were not even Kingfisher specific, but they were very good interviews, so no need for a 10-minute intro this time. Also because, Dustin, I'm rushing to talk to you as you put out a news release, probably one of the longest news releases that I've seen in a while. And I've gone through it. I definitely appreciate the detail in which you've gone on it. So good job writing this thing. I assume you wrote it all yourself. Wish more companies did it that way, actually. But so your title reads, and I quote, Kingfisher outlines 6 new drill-ready porphyry copper gold drill targets at Highway 37 project in the Golden Triangle of BC. So let's maybe kick it off high level. I have a lot of specific questions and we'll get into the nitty-gritty here, but let's kick it off high level and maybe we can go through all 6 of those targets kind of one by one, just like you've done on Twitter, and you can tell me which one's your favorite child, and then we can get into some of the specifics on the back of that.
Yeah, sounds good, Antonio. Yeah, so it was a long and very technical news release. There's a reason for that, though. When you're putting out drill results, it doesn't actually take that much work. Like you draft your figures, you put them out, and the results should speak for themselves. If they're bad results, but they have a good geological, if you've learned something important geologically from them, then maybe it takes a bit more work to kind of explain the gain benefit from it. But if it's just a great result, it's pretty straightforward. In the case of this, we did a lot of technical work that might not be that appreciated. And I have no doubt that a lot of average retail investors, well, they might not understand what we put out, but they also they might not care that much about IP. But what were they going to care about then if we put out news? So we tailored this not just to them, but also to corporates like major mining companies, to analysts, to more sophisticated investors. And really, what we did was we first had to convince ourselves of these targets. So, like I can't go out there promoting things I don't believe in. That's not my shtick. And what we had to do is we had basically had to integrate all our data, go through everything we did this summer, and formulate these targets that we believe in. And then we had to provide the rationale to ourselves. And what we did was we laid out exactly why we believe in these. We could have gone into more detail, but that would have gotten a little exhausting. It did take us, I think it took me 3 weeks of working on the weekends too, of 11 to 12-hour days to put this together, with Gail, our VPX, working with me, and another geologist helping out. And Gail makes the sections, I make the maps. We don't actually use a third party for all that. So quite a bit of work on that end. But like a map, for example, a map's not just a map. A map is telling a story. And what we're trying to do is really convey the prospectivity of this project and how confident we are in these drill targets, but also showing all the evidence that really backs up the claims we have of how good these drill targets are. And I think in my quote, I noted that Williams is the best drill target I've seen in my career, and I stand by that. And I've also said somewhere else that I think this is the best portfolio or pipeline of copper, gold, porphyry targets in BC in a junior explorer. There's other compelling targets that much larger companies have. Somebody might flag, oh, what about American Eagle? Yeah, but that's probably pushing $100 million now, and it's post-discovery. These are earlier stage targets, and there's a lot of opportunity to be gained for investors from the current $6.5 million market cap. And it's not just a one-hit wonder. We've got 6 of them. I guess 3 of them have some drilling. 2 of them are below good gold grades, and 1 of them had never been surveyed before. So yeah, I'll run through them now. So I wouldn't say they were necessarily listed in order of sexiness or priority, except Williams. Williams is our top priority drill target, and that was listed first. So Williams is an interesting discovery. It was made in 2017 to 2019. Basically, Hank is one of the largest gold anomalies in the Golden Triangle in soil, and it was drilled out from the 1980s. Black minerals, which was absorbed by Barrick, drilled out a lot of more bulk tonnage grade, but also some high grade corridors within that. They had a small non-compliant historical resource, pitable, in the 1980s. And they did a fair bit of work, but they never looked for porphyries. It was believed to be an epithermal camp. And that's what we thought actually last year. We thought there was potential for porphyries under it, and a porphyry would be driving it, but we didn't know how deep they might be. And I'll get to that. That's something that will have to be defined by drilling, but we've got a pretty good explanation for how we think they're not actually that deep. Anyways, in 2017, Golden Ridge went across the valley, extended a soil grid, came up with a nice copper soil anomaly. So, in the Hank area where there's the crazy gold grades up to over 10 grams in soils, there's actually below background copper. So it's actually depressed copper, is leached copper, which you would expect in a lithocap environment. you go across the valley where we do not see any geological displacement. So there's no lateral movement or up and down movement. Stratigraphy is the same across both sides. So what I'm getting at is the porphyry emplacement depth isn't actually that much different than the epithermal depth. Anyways, they went over there, found a nice copper anomaly. I forget the exact order, but I think they prospected and then they did a mag survey. They found outcropping bornite potassic mineralization. They found a nice magnetic anomaly, and then they went and drilled it. In the first drill hole, I forget the exact numbers, but they've only drilled 12 holes there in about 6,000 meters, and the highlight intercept was right around 350 meters of zero point 0.4 gold, 0.33 copper. So that's a really good intercept. And I feel like at the market cap we're at right now, I don't think people are really talking about that. And within that hole, there's a sub-intercept of 127 meters of 0.7 grams gold, 0.56% copper. And I put a tweet out where I put that in Christian's metal calculator, metal equivalent calculator online. And it comes out around 92% on the copper equivalent thickness of the Hercules intercept that sent them to like a couple $100 million. So there's very good grades here. And we looked at this area. We weren't able to drill it last year when we drilled because it wasn't permitted then. It is permitted now. And we thought we were on the top of the system just because it looked like fingers of a porphyry coming up, what you call stock. A porphyry stock was coming to surface, and they did IP there, but they did IP after the bulk of drilling. And we didn't really know that until we dug into it and started looking through the old reports, and you could see the date of the survey lines versus the date of the drill hole logs. And it was actually done after. So they didn't have all that information. But in addition to that, the IP was done along the trend of mineralization. So it didn't really resolve things well. Generally, when you're doing a survey, ideally you go perpendicular to it. And it didn't resolve the survey that well. And we did a very long line this year. I think it was over 6 kilometers that covered that, went over went over Hank, and then went actually over another valley that had never been surveyed. And it gave us a much clearer picture of what's going on there. Provided a lot more contrast to the anomaly and really made sense of the geology. So the anomaly there's big. It's a couple kilometers by maybe a kilometer and a half wide, and it goes to about a kilometer depth, which is around the limit of the survey. We integrated that with the other lines, the historical lines, plus the southern line we did in the area, and we had our geophysicist Alex Walcott. He works closely with Charlie Gregg. He did all the work at Saddle. I think he did the work at American Eagle. We had him complete a 3D inversion for us, and it really, really changed the shape of the anomaly and helped us target. Give you a chance to speak there.
Loads to touch upon there actually to begin with, but this is your main target here. Like this is your primary focus. You'd call it your flagship target.
Yeah, well, the beauty of this is that we've looked at this in Leapfrog and in 3D modeling software, and so there's some gaps in drilling in the high grade. With that kind of high grade, you should be drilling a little tighter because you might find even higher grade. And there's 100-meter gaps between the holes, and it comes to surface, fairly narrow at surface. And I put out a comparison slide at scale with some other porphyries in the region, and you can see that you get high grade at surface, but they're pretty narrow. And then at depth, they get broader. Like a porphyry generally roots into something broader, and it doesn't go like a funnel. It's more of an inverted funnel generally, in simplified terms. And as you get hotter and deeper in a porphyry, the sulfide mineralogy changes. At surface, at the top, you might just be pyrite. Then you get to pyrite over chalcopyrite. Then you get chalcopyrite over pyrite. Then you get chalcopyrite over bornite. And then when you get into really good stuff, you get bornite over chalcopyrite or just bornite. And we're still in chalcopyrite over bornite. And there's notes of digenite and covalite rims in there, similar to what I know American Eagles talked about. We don't have that drill core, so I can't confirm that. That's just going off historical logs. But the beauty is the first hole we're going to be able to drill is going to collar mineralization, and it's going to cross the high grade corridor and go in the direction we think it's open. So there's a good shot at hitting like quite a few, several hundred meters of good grades and then extending it. So it's a pretty safe bet for a drill hole to start a program on.
That's what you want at the beginning, kind of show grade there to begin with, and a couple of things that I want to talk about in and about that. But the first thing that you mentioned earlier that actually made me think, and I wrote it down, is that investors might not care as much about the IP surveys, and these IP surveys that you have here, they show these big anomalies, right? But how about if you look at them in the regional geological context, if you will? Has IP been a predictor? Should investors care about the IP? Has it been a predictor of success in similar geological context scenarios? And are there examples where similar anomalies have led to a discovery?
Yeah, so when it comes to porphyry exploration, there's an interesting graph somewhere. I can try to dig it up after this road trip I'm on and send it your way. But it illustrates the time, basically a discovery timeline of all the major discoveries over time, and then the points at which a new technology was invented. So when airborne magnetic surveys were invented, there was a big surge in copper, gold, porphyries discovered. When IP was invented, again. So, airborne magnetics and IP are the two main tools you use for porphyry exploration from a geophysical standpoint. Like EM would be what you'd use for, say, nickel systems, or VMS systems. Gravity works well for VMS systems as well. So, there's different geophysical surveys that work for different targets. And in the porphyry world, magnetic surveys work well. On a regional level, they help you map out where the major intrusions are, and you generally want something off the side of a major intrusion. And then magnetite, which is often in potassic alteration, can create a magnetic high. But then later phyllic alteration can destroy the magnetite, make a magnetic low. So it's not like every porphyry has a magnetic high. Some of them have magnetic highs, some of them have magnetic lows. There's both signatures of this one, and some of our targets have them, some of our targets don't, or a combination. Like Red Chris, for example, has a big magnetic low and then a little high next to it. And then IP surveys. IP is nice because it will find, like, part of exploration is you want to find a bigger target. I was explaining to somebody today in a meeting here in London. In exploration, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. What can you do to make the needle bigger? Well, what you can do is you can look for the halo around a deposit. And, you're not looking for a pyrite deposit. I've heard people talking about the KSM deposit as being one of the largest sulfur deposits in the world because there's so much pyrite around it. Well, pyrite is chargeable. So, you can see it clearly at KSM because it's glacially carved out and it's just beautiful gossan, but it's not like that everywhere else. We do see gossans here, but then you get forest and valley cover. And what we can do here is we can take IP, which has already been done in the area and correlates perfectly with both the epithermal and the porphyry mineralization. And, we can hone in on the target area, and the whole area that we identify in a chargeability anomaly is not necessarily all going to be mineralization. Some of that's going to be more distal peritic alteration, but it hones you in the right area and it gets you into the alteration. And then you start drilling and you vector towards the core of a system. So yeah, IP is very well used. I know you can look at it. Some projects don't have a lot of data available. I know that it's very hard to find any information on KSM, but I do know that there's like big bullseye anomalies at Sulfrets, at Mitchell, which is the biggest one, and at Iron Cap. I know Saddle had a great chargeability anomaly, and that data is all recent and easily available. Red Chris, hard to find, but I found some online, and there's a big chargeability anomaly there too. Look at American Eagle chargeability. Look at Hercules chargeability. It's very common. Within that, though, you can have a big spectrum, though, of where the mineralization sits. It can sit in the 15 millivolt range, but it can go all the way up into the hundreds. And there's different reasons for that. You could get clays in there that might bump it up. You can also have false positives like gravity that might give you a response. I know gravity in EM systems can give you a strong conductor. And in the Athabasca Basin, when they're looking for uranium, they're often looking for these graphite conductors. And then hopefully they'll find uranium associated with it, but they're very strong conductors. So there's always false positives. One thing you can find with a porphyry is maybe you've got a bedding layer that has just naturally a lot of pyrite in it, like a pyritic mudstone, and that might give you a false positive. Luckily, we don't see that here, and we don't. Basically, there's nothing in the geology that indicates there would be pyrite there without hydrothermal alteration.
And I guess the whole model, though, depends on the concept of telescoping porphyry epithermal systems. That's the type of system that you're essentially targeting. Is that a typical model for this region of BC? What's kind of your level of confidence in this model?
So I wouldn't say the whole model depends on telescoping. What telescoping does to the model is it changes the potential depths of the porphyries relative to the epithermal mineralization. So at Williams, you've got evidence of telescoping. You don't see a lot of epithermal mineralization, but you do get some high grade silver veins within it. There's I think a little over 3 meters of 540 grams silver vein in the potassic alteration. At Mary, we drilled 3 meters of 811 grams silver last year within it. It's funny because that would actually be a good intercept for a silver company. But no, the big key is in at Hank, where there's an epithermal system. There's a lot of evidence that these porphyries are actually closer to the epithermal system than they would naturally be in a non-telescope system. And in a non-telescoped environment, basically you have a porphyry come in, and then maybe 1.5 kilometers above a porphyry, you'll get epithermal veins as kind of like the late pulse of fluid, like a few million years later after after a porphyry system. And how is a junior of my size going to go drill like 1 mile long holes looking for a blind target? Like, we're simply not. If it's 500 meters though, that's a pretty standard depth drilling for porphyries. And the evidence we see for telescoping is, yeah, the veins within it, but we also see lithocap alteration on the project. And the lithocap has porphyry clasts in it, and it's just, there's evidence that the lithocap was at surface. There's pieces of fossilized wood in it, and rapid erosion at surface. And you get rapid erosion when you have rapid uplift. So a good example of, that it's a common thing in telescope porphyries. They occur in areas where you have rapid uplift. So a lot of the systems in the Andes have that. And the one unique thing about our project that wouldn't be common knowledge to a lot of people. So Joanne Nelson is a famous retired BC Geological Survey geologist, very famous within the exploration community in the Golden Triangle in particular. She was one of Gail's supervisors on her master's thesis, so they did a lot of mapping together at Mitchell. And in one of their discussions, I don't know if it was in the field or when writing a paper after, she told Gail that the area we're at was historically, when I mean historically, I mean back in the Jurassic time period when it was some island off in the ocean, it was a highland. So it was actually like way up in elevation. And to get way up in elevation, you need uplift. And it's also more prone to erosion. Like a mountain sticks out like a sore thumb, so it's gonna see more rain and whatnot. So it was being eroded actively and rising up as the porphyries were forming, and that to us is pretty good evidence for there being telescoping there. And what that does is that changes those targets. That there's those nice chargeability anomalies underneath Hank, which would be the upper and lower Hank target. It just kind of gives them a higher degree of confidence for us that they're actually porphyry mineralization.
If there is telescoping, though, Dustin, would that necessarily mean that grade variability is going to be your biggest risk or the biggest challenge? Because as far as I understand, the telescoping systems can lead to complex grade distributions.
Yeah, they can. The one aspect of it that we like is that they can upgrade a system. Like Philo is a great example. It's got high sulfidation epithermal mineralization, overprinting disseminated porphyry mineralization. So they can do that. But also the one thing is there can be rapid changes in grade. Basically, you can go from maybe weakly mineralized disseminated gold with high grade structures into the porphyry. And once you get into the porphyry, you might have that similar gold grade, like a 0.3, 0.4, something like that. But all of a sudden, you've got similar copper, and that really changes things. That's a pretty standard porphyry grade. So yeah, it can change very rapidly because you've taken a distance of say 1.5 kilometers and you compressed it to 500 meters. It's like a slinky basically. You just compressed it, so you're covering the same amount of ground but over a shorter distance.
I don't think I've ever thought about geology in that way as a slinky. But that is a good point. Now I'll start.
Just like junior mining stocks going down the stairs, like when you're a kid and you put the slinky.
You're being unfortunately funny today. I like it. It's my type of humor. What about size potential though, Destin, of these telescoping systems? What's kind of the range of what they get? Are those typically big systems? Are they middle, small? What do you think?
From what I know, that shouldn't have any implication on the size of the system. That's a process independent of the size because yeah, it shouldn't have anything to do with it. And I'm sure there's small examples of them. There's also big examples of them, like Philo. Um, but I don't think, at least we're not considering that to have any implications on the size. What we see that gives us good evidence or hope for big systems is the fact that we've got uranium-lead age dating, so the most accurate type of age dating
Okay.
on the Williams system that puts it right in the KSM age date. And KSM deposits are huge. That's they're the only deposits in BC that rival the deposits in the Andes in terms of size.
Okay.
And well, KSM's the largest undeveloped gold deposit in the world. So, in that Sulphurets district, there's, between all categories, between that, Bruce Jack and Treaty, something like 200 million ounces gold and a lot of copper.
Well, that does give you a perspective. I was just thinking, because of the connection between the epithermal and the telescoping system, whether that could kind of limit your size, but essentially you're saying there's no specific reason why it should limit the size.
No, it shouldn't. Absolutely not. The type of system you're looking for and the age of it is pretty crucial to the size. And these
Yeah.
Jurassic systems in the Golden Triangle, or in Quesnel terrain, like you've got Highland Valley and Gibraltar, like these are the big systems in BC for the most part. There's some other ones like the Cretaceous age Prosperity or New Prosperity deposit, which is a huge gold deposit that's has serious social license issues, so might never get developed. But yeah, the real big ones, like the smaller ones, would be Eocene systems, and they're often moly rich.
I also want to talk about the social aspect of it at some point toward the end if we get the time. But at Williams and at Mary, you also talk about deeper bornite-rich zones. Where's that coming from? As in, how do you know these zones are there? I mean, I couldn't find that in. Is that your geophysics telling you that it's definitely there, or is it kind of an assumption that you're making?
So at Williams, there is bornite, and it does come to surface, and it does at Red Chris as well. Saddle, actually, I don't think Saddle has bornite. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Saddle's just a chalcopyrite system. But yeah, there's bornite at Williams. At Mary, we have not seen any bornite in the main area of Mary. But if you get down slope to the north at what's called DM, which is really part of Mary, there's nice bornite little hairline stringers running through the rock. And the thing is, like in a porphyry, you get deeper, it gets hotter. You're getting towards like the heat source, and bornite forms in a hotter environment. So, um, as you get towards the core of a porphyry system in the hotter potassic alteration, that's when you get towards bornite. And not every system necessarily has it, but if you really want the banging grades, you want to get into a nice bornite core.
Okay. Does that mean that the core of the system would be potentially, and again, these are the forward-looking statements we always talk about, but it's potentially closer to surface?
Well, not necessarily, or it might be the core of it, but maybe not like, imagine a porphyry coming in and it can narrow, and the core of that narrow part might be the fluid pathway where it's really hot. But as you get down deeper, it might be wider and larger. That's generally how they look. And in that compilation slide I put up, I went and downloaded sections through various deposits in the Golden Triangle and scaled them so they were all at the right elevation, their actual elevation, but also so that they're all at the same scale, and they have grade distribution that I've color coded to try to make it as similar as possible. The Kerr one I think it just had copper on there, didn't have copper equivalent. But the Red Chris one's a great example because they've got excellent grades at depth. Like some of the best drill holes ever recorded for porphyry gold exploration came out of Red Chris, like I think 1% copper type of thing, plus gold similar. And you do get a bit of that at surface, but just kind of like little whiffs of it. And then as you get deeper, you get broader intercepts of it. And that's the model we're working with. In exploration, you have to work with a model and you try things out to prove or disprove your model, and then you recalibrate. And it's an ongoing process. If you always stick with the same model and never recalibrate, it's kind of like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. You always have to do that. And, you might have been wrong once, and then you'll get it right the second time. But this is a pretty standard porphyry model. It's one of the most well-known and well-used models in exploration. And you go deeper and you're generally going to get better grades. And it's proven time and time again in recent years. A lot of deposits where the historic drilling was quite shallow and they've gone in there and drilled deeper. Red Chris is a great example. There was a historic resource there that was pretty shallow drilling. I'm going to guess in the 250-meter kind of range. And then Imperial in 2007, I believe, went and drilled some kilometer holes, and it was just it just took off. And that resource went from like there's some good images online if you look up of the resource over time, and it went from like this shallow pit to just boom, and that's why they're block caving underground now.
I think you just called my wife insane because she over and over tries to tell me not to put money in junior mining stocks, and she thinks it's going to work. It never works. I keep putting my money there. But this is essentially just what you're telling me here. That's essentially why you say Williams is perspective for multiple stocks, kind of the fingers of the system, and then having those deeper intrusive roots. That's essentially what you just told me, right?
Yeah, and the chargeability gives us that idea that at depth is broadening, and there's a few other factors to point out too. It's focused on a regional structure that we've got a slide in our presentation of this structural model for the Golden Triangle, which is something our VPX scale presented at I think it was the 100th anniversary of the Society of Economic Geologists conference. That's the top journal for doctors, New England Journal of Medicine for geology, for economic geology. That's it, SEG. And she gave a talk on that in 2021, I believe. And it is a model that the BCGS agreed with. There's a lot of things that going into that, and we could maybe talk about that another time. But the big key is we're on this major lineament that stretches from northeast of us right down to the SNP project. Seabridge is working on their Iskut project down there, drilling interesting grades. Looks like they're onto a pretty big new system there. There's the old what's it called? Right, the Bronson Slope deposit, which is a porphyry adjacent to a SNP. And then there's other ground like Enduro has had interesting results in between us and them. So we're right on this structure, and we are smack dab on this structure for Williams. So it's a good place to be. You want to be on these structures because they focus the required fluid flow to generate districts.
Right.
And it's the same thing, at the Lower, same thing at KSM. They're always on these major structures. Same thing if you look at a map of the Andes. Same thing if you look at a map of Papua New Guinea. All these there's clusters of deposits on these lines, and every 50 kilometers you'll get another fault line, and that's where the deposits are.
With you though, there is historic drilling on some of those targets. Is there historic drilling on Williams?
Yeah. There's the 12 holes, 6,000 meters, and good results, like results that would get a lot of traction right now.
Well, what do you think? Yeah, talk to me about these results specifically. What do you think about that historic drilling, and more specifically, how likely is it that yours would be, that you can replicate it, or actually be better because of your, I guess, improved targeting process?
Yeah, so we're going to drill through the core of the system and try to chase it to depth. So I think we will. I hope we can improve on it. That's what we're thinking. That's what we're betting on. And then the goal is just to get longer intercepts. And we're in the top of a system here. That's what it appears to be. Even in a telescope system, you're not going to be getting those epithermal veins down in the guts of the porphyry. The telescoping will only go so far. So I think there's a lot of room to improve on this, and this is a big chargeability anomaly. They've just tested a fraction of it. So yeah, that's our belief, is that this thing could grow substantially.
Some of the other historic drilling that was done at the ME target, am I saying that's ME, right? I shouldn't say me?
We didn't name it.
Okay. Because I didn't want to ask you if you want to drill me. So I'm going to ask if you want to drill ME. ME is showing sodic alteration, which I had to Google multiple times today, but essentially indicating kind of what distal mineralization. Does that put ME kind of lower on your list of targets to go and chase?
So it's sodic alteration, and sodic is sodium-rich alteration that is often, it's hotter, so it's a little deeper, but it's flanking and deeper. And what we see there is that they drilled from the valley bottom, and I don't know, it must be 500 meters above is where we did the IP survey, but they drilled below the valley bottom. So, they hit, so it's got to be in the 800 meter range below where we drilled, but then it's at least 500 meters lateral. Sorry, not to where we drilled, to where we did IP. It's at least 500 meters lateral to where we did. So it fits in the porphyry model. Porphyries don't go for 10 kilometers. Like a kilometer by kilometer would be amazing. So it fits in that model, and we believe that the geochemical. So they drilled at the base of the slope, and there's definitely downslope dispersion, meaning soil movement downslope. Basically, you're on a steep slope, soils move down, and it's kind of smeared an anomaly down the slope. And we think the source of the anomaly is actually located higher up the slope. There's porphyry stockwork mineralization higher up the slope, and then we ran this IP line. It would be nice to have more IP lines in that area, not going to lie. We had a limited budget this year, and to do lines further down, you need to get loggers in there basically to cut lines for safety for people to walk through, because it's pretty steep. We took the easiest topographic location on the top, but it's also the top of the soil anomaly, and intrusives are projecting underneath a sedimentary unit into the mountain there. So it was a pretty good first shot, just to go run an IP line and get values like that. So looks pretty damn good. That alone, honestly, that alone is just as good as what a lot of companies have as their main drill target.
Okay.
Especially where we are too. If you're in like an area that doesn't produce porphyries, which a lot of people are, if you're in the smack dab in the middle of the Golden Triangle with good mineralization around you, you're in a very fertile area. So that immediately should elevate every target, and it should elevate every company looking for these things. You got to be in the right area. If you don't have the right ground, you're not going to find a big deposit.
How would you rank it for you specifically, though? Because you say this would be basically a company maker. This ME target would be a company maker if it was just a standalone, even for one company. But you have Williams as your top priority. Then comes what, Hank or Mary?
That's hard to say. That's really hard to say. Like Mary, we want to get into too. I think everything is going to come down to, we're going to focus on Williams to start. Given the size of the company right now, which you'll probably want to get into, in the market cap, we can't go and test all these targets. We need to have a lot of success and get the share price up, and then refinance after that, and then really get into this. So right now, this is a pipeline. We're not going to test. We're not going to throw a hole into each thing. That would be very stupid from an exploration standpoint. Porphyries, you don't like hit a home run on one hole. You need multiple holes. And we're going to focus on Williams to start, but we've got all these in our back pocket. So like, hopefully we hit a home run early on in the season, and we can, refinance and add another drill at a much higher price and start looking at a few of these other things. Or maybe Williams is looking incredible and we just throw everything at it. It's a good problem to have, and we're not going to be scattered brained going into a drill program just ripping around testing everything. I would say Williams will be the focus first. The Hank targets I really like. I would like to put a hole into those, but that's going to be dependent on the size of a program. Mary as well, I would like to test very much so. Cliff looks very interesting. One thing to keep in mind is that the anomaly you see on the section that goes from Cliff to Mary, that's just a section view of it. It actually makes a semicircle, and that chargeability wraps around the mountain. And we drilled 2 holes kind of where it wraps around last year and hit definitely an almost gold. I forget the exact number, but like hole 2 last year, I think it was around 1/4 gram over 250 meters in that kind of ballpark with some zinc mineralization indicating it's outboard. But Cliff, last year we drilled Cliff and it looked really good. The intensity of the mineralization, not a ton of copper sulfide in it, but very intense alteration and stock working. But we just, based on what we had, we assumed it might be a later pulse or something like that, not part of the same mineralizing event as Mary. Now that we have IP, because we didn't have IP last year, now we've got IP, it's like, okay, no, we need to go deeper and likely inboard, into the mountain where the chargeability changes, where we've got that planned hole in our section. So that's still a very good target. The DM area is really good. They've hit pretty good copper grades there. Yeah, there's a lot going on, but Williams really is the focus.
There is more going on than what you or the company of this size can take on, as you just said. But talk to me about how you strategize around that. Like, what is, at minimum, how many meters do you want to drill? When do you raise it? How do you raise it? What's the entire strategy behind, like, you have this geological thesis, works really well. You've obviously done a whole lot of work on it. I think you forewent, sorry I say it? You foregoed or you forewent drilling this year so that you can actually come up with these high quality targets, which you've done now. But how do you follow it all up so that it works with the money?
Yeah, well, we'll start the program with our highest confidence targets. That's what we got to do, with the goal of, hitting it out of the park, or at least hitting it to the point where we can get the share price up and get more drilling. Yeah. But we'll go at Williams first. And I can't tell you our strategy quite yet because we're working on that for funding this. We've had good access to capital so far, though. We went and raised a little over 2 in the spring to go do this work. I wasn't telling anybody we were going to go drill. And there was some investors who said they'll participate when we drill, but passed on that investment because they wanted to see drill results, which is fair. But now we're going to go drill. And, it's going to be a challenge with dilution. Like, we won't raise more than we need to, but at the same time, we need to make sure we have enough holes to get more than one in. So I don't know exactly how many. I would say like at least 2,000 meters of drilling.
How much is that going to cost you up there? What are you paying per meter?
So that's another issue, is like the less meters you do, there's economies of scale. The less meters you do, the mobilization fee factors more into it. I don't know. I would like to have in the order of 3 million for exploration next year. Okay. There's other work we'd like to do in addition to that, like with our ZTEM survey that we were trying to do, and we had a late June, early July start date penciled into our contract. It just kept on getting pushed back. The company had all kinds of excuses, whether they're valid or not. And then they started in September, and after like a week or so of standby, the weather forecast for 2 weeks looked like rain and snow, and you can't fly it when it's pissing rain out. So we said no and cancel it, and we'll come back with a different operator. So I'd like to do that next year, but ultimately, like, the drilling is the priority. Like, that will help with the pipeline of targets, but it's not going to change dramatically where we would drill next year at Williams. The IP is a more focused survey.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Like, well, what do you need the ZTEM for? But again, it's good to understand that that's not a priority. How is there any creative ideas or something that you can do to raise money, or do you think you're going to just go for straight equity? I suppose some flow through, charity flow through, stuff like that. But anything else, JV part? I mean, you're in London. I know you're going to the 121 in Dubai. There's plenty of strategics there, I would assume. Is that something you would be looking out for, or do you think just straight equity?
Yeah, we're not looking at joint venturing this project. We've had groups approach us, and it was a hard no. We're already optioning the project. It really limits the upside to the company. If we were a project generator, sure, but that's not what we are. This is a bet on a we're going for glory here, and there will be a bit of dilution or a lot, but the same shareholders that are backing us have continued to back us, so they're basically maintaining their stakes. So yeah, I don't know. You can look at it many ways, but I have no interest in doing that. We'd be open to a strategic coming in on an equity level, but even then, I wouldn't really. I'd ideally not take it right now. You can give them too much. They'd be getting it so cheap that if you did make a discovery, it would end up being a pretty cheap purchase for them. But yeah, I'm flexible on a lot of things, but I don't think a joint venture is in the cards for the time being.
Do you think you're going to participate in that placement? I believe you lowered your salary recently or something. Because I'm not sure. Something I saw.
Salary stayed the same this year, but I put about, I think, a third of my after-tax income into the company this year.
Okay.
And now I've got a wedding to pay for next summer, so we'll see. But it's tight. I've got some tax to pay, so it's tight. I haven't actually invested in anything else this year other than Kingfisher, and I've been selling things at their basically all-time low to put into Kingfisher. So it's I can't commit yet, but we'll see what I can do before the next race.
Well, I hope it's a good wedding. Otherwise, you have to sell your wife to put more money into Kingfisher, and that's never going to work.
I don't think she'd have any of that.
When is your drill season again? You said September started to snow, so what are we thinking? May to September?
So in the Golden Triangle, generally like permits for drilling on an earlier stage asset, they start in July and they go to end of October. And the rationale for that is you're in the mountains. There's mountain goats in British Columbia, and the mountain goats are having their kids, their babies in that time of the year, and they don't want them disturbed by helicopter traffic. There are workarounds though. You can get we already have a wildlife management plan, but you can update it further with a biologist, and it's not super expensive. And that will basically allow you to have a certain flight path. I don't know if it's a certainty for us, so I'm not gonna commit to that yet until we undertake that. We'll have money. We'll raise money first, and then we'll try to change the start date. But theoretically, I've looked at satellite imagery, and early June, you'd have no problem drilling at Williams on a normal snow year.
Okay. And then is some of that money that you're going to be raising going to go toward community relationships, First Nations? Is everyone just on board with you, wants you to drill, everyone else happy?
Yeah, so we do have an exploration agreement with the Tahltan First Nation, which is the only First Nation where we work, and that provides basically capacity funding for them to have people to come out to site and do site visits and such. And there's some of that work we'll update our archaeology survey, which is a permit requirement in BC now. Basically, you go out and with an archaeologist before you drill, and they basically clear areas for you, just to make sure there's no artifacts or cultural things in that area. So we'll do all that, and then otherwise, outside of that agreement, we will be. I'm not going to say how much it is because I don't know if it's not a crazy amount, but I don't know if we're under a. I'm not sure if we're under an NDA or whatnot, whether to say so or not. But it's not crazy though. But it is, and then we'll use as many local workers as possible. I've already been meeting with a few individuals, Tahltan elders who have businesses in the area for various things, camps. I know we last year we used a Tahltan affiliated helicopter company. We used Tahltan drilling company. So a lot of the labor was Tahltan. We rented a camp that was a Tahltan affiliated company. So basically, everybody but our geologists had the option of being Tahltan. We tried to get them first and offer jobs. So yeah, we're doing everything right in that sense, and no issues with the Tahltan. Everything good.
Good. I know you almost have to run here, go and meet some actually important people. So let's kind of recap it here, Dustin. If we're talking about 12 months from now, which would mean that your drilling season is now over, and you look back at it, financing, First Nation relationships, assay results, the thesis checking out, what would you want to see in order to say, okay, I'm happy, this worked out well?
Okay, so I'd like to see, and this is a good tie-in. So when we listed back in 2021 on our Gold Range project, which we still own 100% of, and the claims that, there's no holding cost till 2033. I think we were in the range of about a $45 million company, in that ballpark. Kingfisher is a way better company now than it was then. It's a way better company. We've got more, like a stronger shareholder base, an incredible asset, still have that asset. And well, I was a first-time CEO then. I've got like 4 years under my belt now. So we're a much more well-oiled machine. We've got a way better project, and right now we've got incredibly good targets. So I would like to see us at least above that market cap. But from a geological standpoint, I want to make what is called by the market as a discovery. Like Williams already was a discovery, but I'd like to significantly outdo what was already done there and get it back on the map and greatly increase the share price and really give this project what it deserves, which is a lot of drilling.
That's a great way to close it on. Market cap, you want a discovery. I think I'm all out of questions. Anything here at the end? What am I forgetting to ask you? What did you come here hoping to talk about that I failed to bring up?
Oh, that was good. I got maybe a little heavy on the geology, but I hope I dumbed it down a little bit. There's one thing for telescoping. I think I put a link in my Twitter link if somebody wants an explanation of that. And in general, one thing I've found, and just for the record, we do not use AI to write our news releases. But if you go into Perplexity, it's a I don't know, maybe it's a newer like a Chat GPT, but it's more research based. I found it incredibly good for putting things in there and finding them. I put my dog's name in there, Chilko of the Chesapeake, and it had a huge article about like going through his history about how I've trained him hunting. Like it's kind of mind blowing and a little scary, but there's a ton of information on there about pretty detailed geological concepts, and it's broken down pretty well. And for telescoping, for example, it explained it very well in there. I shared it with my geologists, and they were kind of blown away. It's not perfect, but the nice thing is it does have the links to the source articles. So if you want to really get into the weeds, you can do it that way. But in general, I think, yeah, that's a good resource for people that, struggle, might not have the same level of geology, which is most investors. And, we are a technically focused company, and we put it all out there. So it might not appeal to everybody, but it does appeal to some people.
I think you've dumbed it down a lot because even I understood some of that, and so you got to do a lot of dumb dowing. I don't even know how to say that. Thank you so much for investing your time with me, Dustin. This was great.
Thanks, Tony. Have a good weekend.